Testing, testing, testing. All right, part 240. Shut the door. All right, Code of Federal Regulations 49, Part 240, Qualification and Certification of Locomotive Engineers. So, Part A, the purpose and scope, applicability, construction, definitions, and waivers. Consequences for noncompliance, information of collection requirements. Subpart B, component elements of certification process. The certification program required. Approval of design individual railroad programs of the Railroad Administration. Criteria for selection or designation supervisors, locomotive engineers. Criteria for designation of class of service. General criteria for eligibility based on prior safety conduct, individual duties of the furnished data on the prior safety conduct of a motor vehicle operator, individual duties of furnished data on the prior safety conduct of an employee of a different railroad. Criteria for consideration prior to safety conduct of a motor vehicle operation. Criteria for consideration operating rules, compliance, and data. Criteria for considering data on substance abuse disorders, alcohol and drug rules, compliance. Criteria for vision, hearing, and acuity. Criteria for initial continuing educational. Criteria for testing knowledge, criteria for examining skills performance, criteria for monitoring operational performance of certified engineers. Subpart C, implementation of certification process, schedule implementation determinations required as prerequisites to certification, procedures for determining eligibility based on prior safety conduct, procedures making determination on vision, hearing, acuity, proceed for making a determination of knowledge, procedure for making determination of performance skills, procedure for making determination of completing a training program, retaining information supporting determinations, timing limit, retaining information supporting determinations, time limitations on making determinations, denial, certification, identification, qualified persons, criteria for certificate, reliance, qualification, determination made by the other railroads, reliance, qualification requirements of other countries, requirements for joint operation in territories. Subpart D, administrative certification programs, replacement of certificates, operational motoring requirements, operational monitoring requirements, prohibited conduct, revocation of certification, railroad oversight and responsibility. Subpart E, dispute resolution procedures, review the board established petition requirements, process qualification, review petitions, requesting for hearings and appeals. Appendix A to Part 240, schedule on civil penalties, procedures for submission, approval of locomotive engineering qualifications for programs, qualification programs. Procedure for obtaining evaluation, monitoring vehicle driving data record. Identification of state agencies that perform national drivers register checks. Appendix E to Part 240, recommended procedure for conducting skill performance tests. Authority Title 49 U.S. Standard Code 20103, 20107, and 49 Code of Federal Regulations 149. Sources of 56 FR 280 254 June 19, 1991, unless otherwise noted. Subpart A, General. The purpose of this part of the insurer is the only qualified person operating a locomotive or train. This part describes the minimum federal safety requirements for the eligibility, training, or the testing, certification, monitoring of all locomotive engineers. This part does not restrict the railroad from implementing additional for the more stringent requirements for the locomotive engineers that are not inconsistent with the parts. The qualification of locomotive engineers is prescribed and are pertinent to any person who operates a locomotive unless what the person is specifically excluded by the provisions of the part, regardless of the fact that the person may have a job classification title other than that of a locomotive engineer. 243 applicability. The part applies to all railroads that operate the part applies to all railroads that operate locomotives on standards gauge track that is part of the general railroad system of transportation. This part does not apply to the rapid transit operations in any urban area that are not connected with the general system of transportation. A railroad operates only in track inside of the installation which is not in the part of general railroad system of transportation. 245 construction. By issuance of the regulation of the Federal Railroad Administration, it intends to preempt the state law, rule, regulation, or standard covering the same or subject matter in accordance with the provision of Section 205 of the Federal Railroad Safety Act of 1970, Title 45, U.S. Standard Code 434. The Federal Railroad Administration does not intend to issue regulations to preempt any provisions of state criminal law that impose sanctions on reckless conduct that leads to actual loss of life, injury, damage to property, whether such of the provisions are applied specifically to the railroad employees or generally to the public at large. Okay, construction, Part C, 24.5, Part C. Federal Railroad Administration does not intend to use the term locomotive engineer in this part of the preemptive, otherwise altered conditions, interpretation, other existing collective bargaining agreement that employs other job classification titles and identifying the person authorized by the railroad to operate a locomotive. Federal Railroad does not intend the issuance of these regulations to preempt, otherwise other authority of the railroad initiate disciplinary sanctions against the employees, including managers, supervisors, in the normal customary manner, including these contained in the collective bargaining agreements. Nothing is a part that should be construed. Nothing is part that should be construed to create an eligibility or entitlement of the employment in other service for the railroad as a result of denial, suspension, revocation of certification under this part. 247 definitions. Administrative means the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration and the deputy administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration delegating either. Alcohol means of ethyl, ethanol, or includes any or use or possession of any beverage mixture preparation containing ethyl alcohol. Controlled substances has the meaning assigned for the Title 21 U.S. Standard Code 802, includes the substance listed in Schedule 1 through 5, as they may be reserved from time to time in 24 Code Federal Regulations Part 1, 1301 and through 1316. Current employee is an employee with at least 1 year of the experience of the transportation service of the railroad. Designated supervisors of the current employee is any employee within at least 1 year of experience in the transportation service on the railroad. Designated supervisor of a locomotive engineers is a person designated as a railroad, and such a person is designated as such by a railroad in accordance with the provisions of 240-105 of this part. Drug means that a substance other than alcohol that has known mind or functional altering effects of the human subject, specifically including any psychoactive substance, including but not limited to controlled substances. An EAP counselor means a person qualified, experienced education, training of the counsel of a person affected through substance abuse problems to evaluate the progress recovering from the controlling of such a problem. The EAP counselor is qualified, full-time, supplied, salary employed of the railroad. A qualified practitioner who contracts the railroad on a fee for service. The otherwise qualified physician designated the railroad to perform functions of connection with alcohol, substance, and abuse and evaluation of the counseling, as used as a rule, as the EAP counselor owes a duty to the railroad to make the honest, fully informed evaluation of the condition of the progress of the employee. Filling the means of the document filing under the part of this deemed filed upon receipt of the docket clerk, the Federal Railroad Administrative Representative, Associate Administrator of Safety, Federal Railroad Administrator, and Associate Administrator delegated, including any safety inspector employed by the Federal Railroad Administration and qualified state railroad safety inspector acting under the part of 212 of this chapter. Inspector engineer means a person who is instructor engineer and means a person who is qualified locomotive engineer under this part have been selected by the railroad to teach others proper handling and procedures and has demonstrated an adequate knowledge of subjects under the instruction. Joint operations means the railroad operations conducted more than 1 year, one railroad, the same track, regardless of whether such operations are a result. Contractual agreement regulations of the railroads are, number 1. Number 2, order of the government of agencies or court of law. Number 3, other legal binding directives. Knowingly means having actually knowledge of the facts of giving the rise to the violation of a responsible person acting in the circumstances, exercising due care who had such knowledge. Locomotive means a piece of track equipment on which the high rail or specialized maintenance equipment with one or more propelling motors designed to move the equipment, with one or more propelling motors designed to carry the freight of passenger traffic, or both. With 3, without propelling motors of one or more control stands. The locomotive engineer means that any person who moves the locomotive, a group of locomotives, regardless of whether they are coupled or other rolling equipment. 1. A person who moves a locomotive, the group of locomotives, with the confines of the locomotive repair of servicing area as provided for Title 49 Code Federal Regulations 218.5F and 218.29A1. Or a person who moves a locomotive or a group of locomotives for a distance less than 100 feet has, in this incidental movement of the locomotive for the inspection of the maintenance purposes. Multiple main track means a track upon which operation of the trains is governed from one or more of the following methods of operational timetable: mandatory, directive, single indication, any forms of absolute manual or manual block system. A medical examiner means a person licensed as a doctor of medicine, a doctor of osteopath, fully time salary employed by the railroad, a qualified practitioner of the contractors with the railroad on the fee for service other than the basis. Qualified practitioners designated with the railroad to perform functions connections with the medical evaluations employees. As used in this rule, the medical examiner owes the duty to the railroad to make the honest and fully informed evaluation of the condition of the employee. Newly hired employee is any person who is hired with no prior railroad experience or less than 1 year in transportation services on the railroad or another railroad. Means of all forms of high-grounded transportation that run on the rails, electro-pneumatic guideways, including commuter other than short-haul rail passenger service, metropolitan, super area, high-speed ground transportation system connection, metropolitan, with regard to whether the new technologies and that associated with the traditional railroad. Such terms does not include the rapid transit operations within an urban area, then not connected to the general railroad system of the transportation. Railroad officer means the supervisory employee of a railroad. The segment means any portion of the railroad assigned for the supervision of one superintendent, equivalent transportation officer. Substance abuse disorder refers to physical, physical dependency on alcohol, a drug, or other identifiable, treatable mental or physical disorder that involves abuse of drugs, abuse of alcohol or drugs. A primary manifestation of substance abuse disorder is active within a mean of the part of the person, 1, currently using alcohol other than drugs except for the medical supervision consistent with the restrictions described in statutes 219.103 of the chapter, and 2, has failed successfully completely primary treatment of the successful participation of the aftercare of the directed EAP counselor. Type 1 similar means a replica of the control compartment of the locomotive with all associated control equipment functions in a response to the person manipulation causes the gauges associated with such a control to appropriately respond to the consequence of manipulation. Pictorial audibility graphically illustrate the route to be taken. Graphical audibility physically illustrates the consequence of controlling manipulations in terms of their effect of training braking capacity in the train, force levels through the train, and in the computer enhanced so that it can be programmed on specific training consistent with the knowing physical characteristics of time of the line illustrated. Type 2 simulator means a replica of the control equipment of the locomotive. Functions in response to personnel manipulation causes the gauges associated with it, such as controls inadequate to appropriately respond to the consequence of the manipulation. Pictorial audible graphical illustrates the route to be taken. Graphically audibility illustrates the consequence of the control of the manipulations in terms with the effect of the train speeds, making capacity, and train force for the levels through the train, and in the computer enhanced so that they can be programmed specific training consistent with now known physical characteristics of the line illustrated. Type 3 simulator means a replica of a control equipment of the locomotive that functions in the response of the person's manipulation causes the gauge associated with such controls to appropriately respond to the consequences of manipulation. 2. The graphically illustrates the route to be taken. Graphically illustrates the consequences of the control manipulations in terms of the effect of train speed, braking capacity in train, of the force through the train, and a computer in hand so that it can be programmed with specific terrain consistent with knowing physical characteristics of the line illustrated. 249 waivers. Any person with a petition of the Federal Railroad Administration for a waiver of compliance with any requirement prescribed in this part, each petition of the waiver under this section must be filled with a manner containing the information required in Part 211 of the chapter. If the administration finds that the waiver of the compliance in the public interest and consistent with the railroad safety he or she may grant the waiver subject to any conditions that she may deem necessary. Consequences for noncompliance. Any person entity of any type under the Title 1 U.S. Standard Code 1, including but not limited to the following: railroad manager, supervisor, official, other employee, agent, railroad owner, manufacturer, leaser, lessor, railroad equipment, track, or facilities, independent contractor providing goods or services of the railroad, an employee, any employee of such owner or manufacturer, leaser, or lessor, independent contractor who violates the requirements of the part this is the violation of such requirement is subject to a civil penalty at least $500 but not more than $11,000 per violation, except for the penalties may be assessed against individuals only with willful violations apparent. Repeated violations has created imitation hazards of death, injury, and person caused by the death and injury. A penalty is not exceeding $22,000 violation may be assessed. Each day a violation continues shall constitute a separate offense. Appendix A, a statement in the policy contains a schedule of civil penalty amounts used in connection with this rule. Any person, including the railroad, any manager, supervisor, official, other employee, agent of the railroad who violates a requirement that is part and causes the violation, any part cause of the violation. Any person, including the railroad, any manager, superficial, official, other employee, agent, a railroad who violates the requirement for this part causes the violation of any such requirement subject to disqualification from all safety-sensitive services in accordance with the Part 209 of this chapter. Any person, including the railroad, any manager, supervisor, official, or other employee agent of the railroad who knowingly, willfully satisfies any record required of the part may be subject to criminal penalties under the provision of Title 45 U.S. Standard Code 438. In addition, with the enforcement methods referred to the paragraph A, B, and C of this section, from the FRA may also address violations of this part of the use of the emergency order, compliance, and order and injunction provisions of the Federal Safety Act. 2413 and information collection requirements. The information collection of the requirements of the parts reviewed with the Office of Management and Budget pursuant to the Paperwork Reduction Act of 1980 that are signed off the OMB Control number 2130 over 053 0533. The information collection requirements are found in the following. Basically 240 101 through 103, 105, 107, 109, 111, 113, 115, 117, 119, 121, 123, 124, 125, 127, 129, 201, 205, 207, 209, 211, 213, 215, 219, 221, 223, 27, 28, 29, 30, 301, 3013, 3015, 307, 309, 401, 4013, 405, 407, 411. Subpart B, component and employment elements. I think the appendix in page 1 went over the civil penalties. This is continued. But the failure to indicate participation in the debriefing critical sequences is a violation of 100,000 with willful, in violation 200. Failure to make record available D2 is 1,000 to 2,000. Emergency exits door not marked instruction new posted 2,500 to 500 willfully. Door improperly marked instruction 1,000 to 2,000 improperly posted 25 to 5,000. Failure to provide children inspection, maintenance, and repair emergency windows and doors 5,000 to 7,500. Failure to test a representative sample of emergency weapon 3,000 1,600 emergency window tested and is too infrequently 1,500 300 failure to repeat an operative emergency window or door exit 35 to 700 failure to maintain a record of the 2,500 to 500 failure to make a record available insufficient limits and failure to make a record available goes from $1,000 to $2,000 insufficient limits of controls accessibilities records from 2,500 to 500 missing terminal 1,000 to 200 inability to railroad to produce information usable format in immediate view from 1,000 to 2,000 failure to the railroad to designate an authorized representative 1,000 to 200 failure to make a record available 1,200 subpart C review of approval retention emergency preparedness plans filing an approval is one railroad for failure to railroad written emergency preparedness is $5,075. Failure to designate a primary person to contact for the plan review, the 1,000 to 2,000 failure to the railroad to file an amendment to this plan is 2,500 to 500. Failure for the failure of the railroad to correct a plane deficiency, 2,500 to 5,000 willfully. Failure to provide Federal Railroad Administration corrected copy of the plan, 1,000 to willfully, 2,000 willfully. Failure of the railroad to correct amendment of deficiency, 2,500 to 5,000 willfully. Failure to correct the amendment of the Federal Railroad Administration, 1,000 and 1,000 willfully. Retention emergency preparedness plan. 1. Failure to retain a copy of the plan amendment of the plan 2,500 to 5,000 failure to make a record available 1,000 to 200 subpart D of the operational and testing inspection records of record keeping operational tests. The testing program is from 1,500 to 7,500 failure to maintain a record 2,500 to 5,000 record improperly completed with 1,000 to 1,000 failure to retain a copy of the record failure to is also 2,500 to 5,000 willfully. Failure to make a record available was 1,000 to 2,000 willfully. Electronic record keeping insufficient time controls accessibility records 25 to 500. Missing terminals 1,000 to 2,000. Willfully immediate inability railroad to produce information usable format and immediate review 1,000 to 2,000 willfully failure to railroad designate authorized representative 1,000 to 2,000 and failure to make a record available 1,000 to 2,000 electronic record keeping. We're now going to proceed to subpart B of part 244 part 240 qualification certification locomotive, and I'm going to cut it.